We're starting the recording and we're going to go straight to announcements. Over to you, Liz.
So there's a group of folks led by Philippe Zouton. Some of you may know his work, and it's called it's through the IPSA. It's international. This is the International Conference on Public Policy. It's their 7th meeting. They do a meeting every other year somewhere and on the planet. And this coming summer, it is in Thailand. And Anamika Van Drul at Duke Kun Chan and I are putting together a One Health panel, and I am putting together a narrative policy framework panel. Papers are due tomorrow, I think, and I don't know. I don't think they typically extend the deadline. It's just an abstract. You can join virtually as well as in person, and who wouldn't want to go to Thailand in person? It's in Chiang Mai. And I'm also doing a pre-conference NPF workshop there, and I will rely somewhat on this group for some of the content of that. So I'll be in touch later with that.
Fantastic, Liz. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then Laura, there's it's actually from Liz, but I think it's about a chapter that you have. Do you want to just share that information with us, or Liz, either of you?
I was just doing that because Laura's going to talk about her work, and that's the chapter.
Okay, great. So you're previewing us for the next part of this. Thank you. Other announcements? All right. I'll just very, very briefly say that I'm in charge of putting together the panel for February, and I get a ton of work on this before Christmas and then have done nothing. But I've reached out to a couple of folks, and the theme for February is focused on reaching out to practitioners and building a bridge to practitioners. So focused on people who are very specifically working on narratives and policy, but from an advocacy point of view. And we've got some really cool people that have said, hey, I'm interested. So we'll be sending out, firming that up and sending that out for the February one. And I hope you'll be a part of it. People that are really sort of nationally prominent in this are interested, and we have a chance to learn from them and how they approach it. And I think it just even the couple of little conversations that I've had with people to put this together, it's fascinating to hear them talk about their process, who they're working with, and how they think of narrative and how they kind of categorize different pieces and aspects of it. All right. I think I turn it over to you now, Eula. Does that sound right?
That sounds right. Thank
Okay.
you, Kathy, for doing the introductions. We'll start out with the topic of today now, which is innovations in narrative coding. We have about 20-minute panel discussion featuring Andy Pattison, Kylie Angling, Laura Walton, and Liz Shanahan. And then we'll have about 20 minutes, but if we need more time for Q&A and open discussion, where also other people could share what they're working on or what questions they have. And after the panel discussion, we have Alexandra Prunkona from University of Helsinki, who will share some of her work. She's also working on automated coding, and she encountered some challenges she would like to discuss and share with the community. So we'll also have some time for that. But before we start with the panel, I would like to do a short introduction of the topic, and I would also like to know of you what your prior knowledge is. So I will just ask you some things and ask you to raise your hand if you know the concept or, yeah. So who of the persons here has already experimented with automated coding of narratives? Great. I'll go for some more knowledge questions. Do you know what a dictionary is? Do you know what sentiment analysis is? Great. Do you know what a topic model is? That's great. And has anyone here used a large language model to code narratives before? Okay, great. We'll start with the panel now. I first prepared some individual questions to all the participants to talk about their experience and the work they have done to kind of establish the state of the art and what has been done in NPF research. And then we'll more discuss the implications and for NPF theory, challenges from a methodological perspective. And then we'll go into the open discussion. So I'll start with Laura. Well, you worked on a book chapter and on an article where you used various innovative coding methods. Could you maybe briefly summarize what you did?
Sure. Yeah, I've done a couple articles and then the book chapter, and I have a dissertation with some unpublished stuff. And I say that because I'm just going to talk about what I've done in those. The things that we have coded in the past were policy solutions, evidence, which we used, Dr. Crow, who's here, we used as part of the setting, characters, and we've associated all of those codings with issues or problems which can be part of the setting and frames. And in my dissertation, I code and track blame over time. So to do that, I generally used a dictionary creation process, but to do that, I used a lot of automated methods like natural language processing to identify word types, parts of sentences, word frequency like n-grams to find frequent phrases. So, because typically, I mean, not typically, but often it's not one word. It's often multiple words or phrases that we use that we're looking at. I used methods like regex, which is just, I mean, it's not a method, it's a bit of a tool that you can use to find items when they don't have a specific, an exact form. So it allows you to find things of multiple forms. And then I use topic models like LDA, latent Dirichlet allocation. So to find groupings of topics. So some of the innovative things, I think, I'll call them innovative, I guess, to me they were innovative, is that I use probability distribution functions and the related statistics to check the validity of my results with the sentiment analysis. And then I'm using automation to sort and identify characters and their associated sentiments. So you can use automation to do a lot of cleaning. You can do, a lot more than just the auto coding. I know that is one thing we really like, but the other aspects are huge to be able to clean all these articles and then to do regression analysis. We can do all kinds of things when we have this as a data set in the computer. So, and then just I used tools from other different disciplines that reference power and affect, for instance, like the Harvard Board Dictionary for Sentiment Analysis. So you can sort of use those to back out some social construction scores. And I did that in my dissertation. And I think I said that I created, I created those blame and character dictionaries using synonyms, so some deductive approaches, but also kind of bulking them up with these inductive approaches. So I called it semi-automated approaches because I really think it's important to keep your hands in the process.
Now looking back on the work you've done and on your process, what were challenges? Are there any things you would have done differently?
Things I would have done differently. Because I was, yeah, there there were challenges because I was really feeling my way through things. I think the the biggest challenge that I faced was that I didn't have a huge support network in terms of the technical side because it's really interdisciplinary. So there wasn't sort of an established, I didn't have a lot of people to go to because programmers, anyway, weren't quite doing what I was doing. I think in terms of methodological decisions that I would make differently, I would potentially have collaborated more with the computational poetics folks who they really have a good grip on using computational methods for assigning characters a role. They'll take big fiction books and they'll assign them, like Harry Potter is the hero, and so they can do that with so I think I could have shortcut some of it by using some of what they already had.
Yeah, and why was autocoding in your case like the better choice or a good choice, a better choice than manual coding? And what was like the added value?
I mean, for me, the added value was not reading 5,000 articles. I'm kidding, but I did huge data sets, right? There are 6,000 news articles and 50,000 tweets. And so, but the value is, being able to take some from different states and compare across states, compare across candidates, and having those representative samples there. I would say that it increases the systematicity, right? There's this reduction in the potential bias by coders, and we know that in a political context, this definitely can happen, especially in a university setting where there tends to be, political bias, and we try to recognize it, but it's hard to get out of our own way. So I think that this is something that really needs to happen. And was there anything I could not have shown with manual coding? I certainly could not have shown how different characters had similar or different sentiment scores, like how the ranking of them. I could have shown that they were characters, but to show how they were related, for instance, how a hero and an expert in the news articles had significantly similar signature for their sentiment distribution. That's one example, right? So we see in those news articles, we're seeing experts very similar to the heroes of the story, data, facts. And I definitely couldn't have done some of the other statistical analyses that I did without the automated coding.
Great. Thank you, Laura. We'll go on to Andy. And I will ask you very similar questions. Could you maybe briefly summarize what you did?
Sure. I guess I appreciate the introduction that Kathy gave to it and try to be in the spirit of learning and not trying to sound smart, which I'm in no danger of doing. But I'll try to sort of give some background because I know that there's some people here who know a lot about auto coding and some people who are mentioned they just are trying to become better policy scholars. So I'll try to open it up a little bit. I am a graduate of University of Colorado Denver School of Public Affairs, like some other fine people in these boxes in front of me. I was there a few years before Desiree joined the faculty, with Chris Weibel and Tanya Heikela as my main two advisors. And I came up doing survey work and advocacy coalition framework stuff. And that's the way I was brought up as a little baby in this process, right? And that's what dad and grandpa did. So that's what I was going to do, I thought. And my work and interests kind of moved in a different direction. And I'm, very happy with having landed in an interdisciplinary environmental studies program because my original degrees are all biology. I was a butterfly biologist before I became a policy scholar. And um, the reason I say that is because when I was taught the theories of the policy process book way back when it was in the second edition, that's the blue edition by Peter de Leon, the NPF didn't have a chapter yet, right? And so like I came up and doing a lot of work and got past the dissertation phase, and like all of a sudden everybody was talking about NPF, and I don't remember if it was the third or the fourth edition, where I think the third, when the NPF got a chapter, right? And so like all of a sudden it's now in the canon, right? Now there's the book of NPF that we're studying, and I was really interested in it. And I was teaching out in California at the time because I made the mistake of marrying another academic, and she was going to grad school at UC Santa Barbara. And I was teaching down by LA. And I met this policy guy who did political communication. He wrote his book, his dissertation on the early days of Facebook and political organizing on Facebook. And he was telling me that you could like study things on Facebook and figure out things and how they become, like how people argue and how they're organizing. And I was like, God, that sounds like that new NPF stuff. That could be really interesting. And so we started talking, and he wanted to study Twitter. And I want to be really clear about something. Twitter had not yet been owned by a juvenile fascist. And also, I wasn't on Twitter at the time, and I didn't know anything about it. And so I started off talking to him and some others. So what I wanted to do, I was in New York then. I wanted to study maybe fracking, and I thought, well, New York has this moratorium. Pennsylvania doesn't. Maybe pre-post, we can look at the way people are arguing about it. Like I was very ethereal about it. I didn't know what I was talking about, right? And I also barely knew what API data was. Yeah, this is like 2018 or something like that. So anyway, we get some money. We buy the Twitter API data. We try to capture everything around fracking and New York and Pennsylvania. It's like a million tweets, right? We very quickly abandoned Pennsylvania to focus on New York. And we have a 12-year period, and before and after the moratorium. And once we cleaned it up, and I have to look at some notes here because it's been a while. Sorry. 12-year period. Once we cleaned it up, it was 160,000 unique tweets, and crossing both pre and post, and about 50,000 unique users. And one thing that grabbed me, was really interesting when I was going through this and learning about this stuff, was that the idea of a retweet, like just conceptually, follow me here, this is like a little bit woo-woo. Just like the idea of a retweet in a system kind of sounds like a policy entrepreneur to me. Now, I'm not saying it's the only way to operationalize it, but it seemed like it might be an interesting way to operationalize it. Someone who's shaping the dialogue, someone who's being echoed, someone who people is following. Literally, like the word follow appears in some of the definitions. So like that seemed pretty cool. So we decided to focus because we could not code 160,000 tweets, right? So we decided to focus on the 500 most influential accounts. And we did influential by a base number. They had to have tweeted this many times, and they had to have gotten this many retweets. And it was the most people who had been retweeted. In other words, the people who lead the echo chamber, so to speak. And we coded them into coalition. And then we used auto coding with sentiment analysis on the population, pro, anti, and neutral for fracking, wanting it in New York State before. And the idea was look for the devil and angel shift before and after. If you all remember in 2018, everybody was writing about whether or not it was whether you were winning or losing, or whether it was your policy position alone that might have shaped which one you were doing. And there was sort of an argument at the time. And I thought, well, that sounds cool. Let's talk about that. And the devil and angel shift obviously linked to some stuff I had used to do in ACF. I got to like cite Dante's talking about devil. I used the word cherubic in an article. I was very happy with myself. I feel like I don't get enough credit for that, quite frankly, because I think that's the most exciting part of that article. Anyway, so short answer, I want to like now link it to some words and some coding. We used a bag of words with the sentiment analysis, right? Devil shift words, I'm just going to name a few: anger, fear, sadness, disgust. Some things you might feel if you actually saw the devil, who in his original incarnations is standing in ice. I don't know if you all know that. It's super cool. Go read Dante. Angel shift words, what you might be feeling as you see an angel or right before, anticipation, trust, surprise, and joy. So those were the words we used. There was some other ones, but those are the main ones. And short story long in the article, we found that the devil shift language, especially directed at Cuomo, the then governor of New York, who, you know, you could argue was the person who did the moratorium. It's not that simple. Went down after by the pro-fracking coalition, and the anti-fracking coalition was doing angel shift language and then downshifted. It's not exactly full support of you devil shift if you're losing, you angel shift if you. It's not like that. It's more about your policy position and whether you lost or won, maybe, but not necessarily. Strengths. I liked using the sentiment analysis. I think sentiment analysis is a good way to think about angel and devil shift. I think it's pretty direct. I think it's honest to what those ideas are about, right? Power being high or low, and their intentions being good or bad, right? Strengths are that the changes in emotions are in the same folks, right? We had 500 people before and after, so we're directly measuring the same humans, which is pretty cool. I think our policy entrepreneur operationalization was interesting. Limitations, we didn't have all of the API data, demographic data. We coded them to coalition. We might have made some assumptions based on their policy positions and their Twitter handle, you know, whatever. Okay, I'll be quicker this time. We had the same data set for our second article. And what we wanted to do was use auto coding more to see if we could auto code for coalition this time. We wanted to test whether we could get all 160,000 tweets, all 50,000 unique users into the same bucket and run sentiment analysis again. So same data set. We ran 2 different word dictionaries to train our classifier, which I will call Skynet after the original Terminator movies. So we trained the machine to learn how we coded our 500 with a psychological bag of words and a the more typical dictionary one that you're used to, and we to try to have teach the machine how to split it up, and then we ran that machine through classifying all 160,000 tweets, 50,000 unique users, and then tested it. It did great. The top line number is it classified with 80.5 accuracy, which is compared to 33% random, or if you were guessing with the base percentages knowledge, you'd get 50%. So in other words, increased quite a bit, not 100% though. Still super interesting. Liked playing with Skynet. I'll just throw out a couple of complications that we can talk about later, and then I'll shut up. Which is like, there are lots of people on these boxes who know a lot about this. So I'm just giving my opinion and what it was 2 years ago, which is like unsupervised learning is really good. This is the machine. It's really good if the goal is to find patterns in data by identifying commonalities between cases. Think cluster analysis or topic modeling to kind of name your coalitions if you don't know what they are yet. But supervised learning is better when you want an algorithm to classify new instances of a case. In other words, you know what a pro-fracking person looks like, and you want to figure out what box this person belongs in. Okay. And then I would also say that I think with the bag of words, it sometimes becomes difficult to differentiate between different narratives when all of your discussion is in one policy domain. Now, there are people here who know, like there are people who are nodding here and other people not sure what I'm saying is if you're talking about fracking policy in New York, it is sometimes difficult to differentiate whether one person is arguing one kind of narrative pro or against compared to another kind of narrative. And NPF would say, oh, wouldn't it be interesting if you were emphasizing jobs as compared to energy independence, right? As a reason. Okay. And then the last one is the machine was catching crying as negative or sad. But we found a few instances where people were saying I'm crying tears of joy because they were anti-fracking. And then another last example, and then I'll shut up, is we saw this thing popping in the pro-fracking coalition that they were really worried about mental health. So dig through the data. Why is it coding? Why is it saying these people are so worried about mental health? Just because a priori I wouldn't think that would be a big thing. It turns out they were saying crazy liberals, right? And so that word was triggering the machine to think, oh, they're talking about mental health. Okay. What would I do different? I'm not sure I'd do anything different. Were the things I couldn't do? We couldn't code originally all the all 160,000, but it was once we taught the machine what a coalition looked like, it was easy to work with it. So those are things that I'm really glad I went through the process and I learned some skills that I'm applying to my new project that's like a little less dependent on Skynet and more dependent on me being a better coder of legislation and interviews. So
Great, thanks for sharing, Andy. And with that, we'll slowly go over to the large language model part with Liz. Liz, you told me that you would like to also establish kind of the difference between those approaches that still need a lot of training and the large language model. Do you want to start with that?
Yeah. So I'm going to not talk in as much detail about my studies like that Andy just did a beautiful job, frankly, as much as I'm going to talk really super high level. And part of that is I work with really like people who are way smarter than I am, who are my Lauras in my life, right? So I've got people, and they tend to be in computer science, who understand this at a very technical level in a way that I don't. So I am talking up here, and I can answer some questions to a certain point in terms of the technical aspects. Okay, so natural language processing, and so Kylie, you can correct anything that I'm saying because she's actually an expert in a way that I am not. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from her. But natural language processing requires what's called supervision. And so supervision means you need to train. You need to train it. You need to say, hey, this is an example. This isn't just what a hero is. This is an example of heroes. And so we had a bunch of interviews from Eastern Montana on flood and flood risk. We wanted to build risk communication narratives. And then we wanted to test to see what narrative construction was going to be most influential for people to engage in flood, what is that called? Like risk reduction behaviors. Oh God, it sounds so awful, but anyway.
Mitigation, is that the word you're looking for?
Thank you. Right, but yeah. So we had these interviews and we hand-coded, human-coded a bunch, so that required training humans. And then we took that code and we trained a machine to auto code a bunch more of these interviews. And it was a ton of text. I mean, a ton of text. Because when you have, we were out talking to people and we'd have 2-hour interviews. You don't want to code a 2-hour interview, never mind times 30, right? So we took human coding and then trained for natural language processing. We wanted to find out basically relative frequency. And what we were aiming to do was to build these risk narratives that were based in local language. We wanted to use people's words, who they thought of as their heroes, what their settings were, etc. And so we have some Persuasion with Precision. Anne-Marie Reinhold is the lead author on that. She basically, our argument was we have to shine a light on how we're building these risk messages, and we need to do it systematically. So we use natural language processing to do that, and we're successful, and found that it's the victim to hero narrative that is the most powerful in terms of influencing mitigation behavior. Then, and this is the importance of going to conferences, you guys, and meeting face to face. So I was in Australia and I work with this team. There are a bunch of really smart people in infectious disease, disease ecologists, virologists, and Manuel Ruiz Aravena. I walked out, we were in these VRBOs, we're in Australia because we needed the team to be in site to understand like the landscape that we were doing a work in. And so this is all infectious disease bats and stuff. Super beautiful, super cool. So I walked into this VRBO, walked out in the back porch, and we had these kind of meetings, these Zoom meetings. And he said, so Liz, I've been thinking about the qualitative data that you have. And I had done a survey that asked people, what is the problem with zoonotic spillover? Who should fix the problem and what is the solution? And there were 3 separate questions. And he's a disease ecologist, and he is next to Anne-Marie Reinhold, he's the smartest person. I shouldn't say that, I'm being recorded. Anyway, he's really, really smart. And he just said, so I think we can use this thing called ChatGPT. And I was like, huh? And I didn't trust it at all. I was like, human coding, natural language processing, we got to train, supervise. And so we just continued the conversation. And ChatGPT, so all these iterations of ChatGPT, were unfolding. And we took we didn't use my Australia survey data, we used this and survey data that on COVID called memorable messages, and Desiree is involved with this. And this was pre-ChatGPT, so all the memorable messages were actually typed by people. And what we did, we said, so there's a lot of information out there. What information has influenced your risk perception the most? Something like that. Like, what is the message that has really changed how you think about this? And we human coded. So we had armies, and Honey was one of them, army of people who were human coding this. So what we did was that we took this human coded data and we just took a methodological approach to this. And we said, okay, let's run this through ChatGPT. It sounds simple. It sounds simple. It is not. So what is ChatGPT? It is a generative AI. And Kylie, I know you're going to help me with this, right? But ChatGPT is an example of a large language model. And so what ChatGPT can do, and this is that you can have no to low supervision. It's called zero shot or few shot learning. And so where does ChatGPT get its knowledge? It gets its knowledge from all these web sources. And what we did when it's called prompt engineering. So we told ChatGPT, prompt engineering is a fancy word to say give it directions. So we trained ChatGPT like we trained human coders. We gave it almost the same instructions. So there is some training, but I didn't give it examples of human coding. I gave it how we trained the human coders. We gave it, the team. This includes Nathan Jensky, who is Desiree's PhD student, who's also really, really smart. And so it took a number of iterations because ChatGPT makes stuff up. It does hallucinate. It's better now, but it does hallucinate. And it would actually make up like numbers, and it would make up data that it would, like memorable messages that it would then analyze. So you can't just feed ChatGPT text. I mean, you can, but the guiding principles are scientific principles of reliability and validity, right? And so what we aimed for after a lot of iterations, and then iterations across ChatGPT iterations, we worked really hard on validity, and we're going to publish this, and we're going to put the code out there, and we have it in a GitHub, and we're just behind in getting this out, you guys. So you're going to be able to take it and put it in R, and we trained it to put it into a CSV file, because then, once it does some coding, right? So let's say it does heroes, and it has, the President of the United States, it has Congress, it has, my governor. Well, it will name those people, and then you can either take it and topic model it, or you can ask ChatGPT to do that and say, so can you group these? So it will give you the individual names, and then it can group them. And anyway, so I lost where I was going with this. Oh, so we made sure that it was as valid as we could get it through prompt engineering and checking the data. And then what we did is that we treated ChatGPT like a coder. We had human coders, we had ChatGPT across these different, like, whatever it was, like 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, Turbo, 4.0. So we treated them as different coders, and we've run intercoder reliability on it. And so we don't presume humans are better. We don't presume humans are better. We're just looking at how similar, how dissimilar these are. I think LLMs are the use of large language models with really careful prompt engineering is going to be a game changer for anyone looking at textual data. Humans will never disappear. You cannot not have humans check. And I would say this is where so PhD students are not going to be out of a job. You take 10% of your LLM coding, and then you do need to check it. And if there's a problem, you need to go back. Oh, and importantly, you can turn off the web, because we didn't want ChatGPT to learn from reading one memorable message to the other. So we worked hard at making sure that the web was off and that it wasn't learning as it went along. We wanted it to be the same kind of line of sight through these textual data. So there's a lot of consideration here, obviously, but I do think it's going to, done properly, carefully, I do think that we're in for some really promising tools, methodological tools, into our future. I'm just going to stop there. Kylie,
Thanks, Liz.
you correct me.
We'll go right over to Kylie, because you are also, or were working on a project that tries to use LLMs for NPF coding, and you are the methods person in the project. So it's also interesting to hear your perspective. What do you want to add? Did you do this exact same thing as Liz? Did you do things differently?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I have no, that was beautiful. That was a perfect explanation. And I really like some of the things you said that okay, well, one thing I did do different is my perspective is on, I agree that you can't actually assume that your human coders are better than, one of the LLM output, but we sort of used a framework that assumes that the human coder is still the gold standard. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about that. So in this study, we were coding hundreds of thousands of tweets. And this was during the COVID-19 crisis, particularly tweets about teachers and how they were being characterized during COVID-19 crisis. And then ultimately, the method we came down on for auto coding was to use the OpenAI, that's a Python API that lets you interact programmatically with ChatGPT, which is really nice because it lets you run these things really fast, and you can do hundreds of thousands of tweets instead of copy pasting in the chatbot, et cetera. And so the way that, because I think I came from the supervised machine learning, train the model perspective, I actually still really like to use the same framework that researchers have been using to train models for a long time. And by that, I mean, take a chunk of human codes that, in this case, tweets that have been coded as hero, villain, victim. In this case, 1,000 or plus hand-coded by humans. And then randomly split that data into 3 components: your training data, your development data, and your validation data. And if we were in the traditional supervised machine learning framework there, we would have 80% would be spent on training our model, right? But maybe we'd set aside 10% to be able to choose between maybe our 7 best performing models, and we'd use our final holdout testing data set to give the final model performance. So that's what you do when you're training a machine learning model from scratch. Here, we're still splitting into a kind of training and a kind of development and a kind of testing. But as Liz pointed out, training does not require thousands of examples anymore. It maybe requires 3, maybe requires 0. And so we spend like 5% of our data on training, and I don't remember exactly what our split was. Maybe it was 30 on development and the rest on validation. And that's really nice for a couple reasons. So now we use the training data set to be able to use some examples for the few-shot learning that Liz talked about. So now we have a couple of examples there that we can use to feed the model. If you have a few more, you can do what's called fine-tuning, where with, say, 50 examples, you let the large language model update its final parameters. And so that's actually changing the model a little bit rather than just assigning the same or using the same model that just comes out of the box. So that's what we'd use for the training. Then we use the development data set to be able to select to do the prompt engineering that Liz was talking about, to try and pick the best performing prompt, which prompt gives us the output here that most aligns with what our human coders would select for each individual tweet. And then we saved plenty of data for final validation. And we did that to be able to estimate with, a higher degree of certainty how well the alignment is, I think, between the human and the LLM. I do think Liz is right that alignment's probably a fine word here, because it's not really like how accurate or how good the LLM is, because you do find cases where the human was probably missed something, they got tired or whatever it is. So yeah, that's the way that I've been thinking about LLMs lately. Oh, I'm sorry. I wanted to say one other thing, that in the prompt engineering, I also really liked that Liz said we train it like we train our human coders, because that is true, right? You're not just giving examples. Like the actual text that you provide matters here, just like it would if you were to hand off a project to somebody else. The way you explain it really does matter. So I find that interesting and kind of fun, because it brings it back to the definitions of things really matter, and the way that you describe things really matters. And I like to think about the way that you define concepts. So that's really fun. So I'll maybe kind of wrap up there. I'll note a couple that I, the way that we did it still required 1,000 plus, hand-coded tweets. And maybe if you were talking about full interview transcript, the size of your document, 1,000 probably may not happen. And so maybe you can't do that full kind of process, but when you can, it's nice because you get a good sense of, again, the alignment, but also of whether you have chosen the best or the approach that gives you the highest alignment between the human and the machine.
Great. Thank you. Since we're already a bit behind schedule, I think I will start with just the general questions that are to all the panel participants. And I will start with you, Kylie, again. From a methodological perspective, when you encountered the NPF, were there any specifics of the framework that were challenging to capture with these methods?
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to answer it positively first, which is that it's really nice that the NPF has really well-defined concepts, that it sets you up, to succeed. And in other times when I'm trying to get, to get an LLM to align with humans, I'm spending a lot more time trying to get humans to align with each other. And so I think with the NPF, because there's been lots of work defining these concepts and really coming to an agreement on what they can mean, though it can change in certain circumstances, that's quite nice. What's hard about it? Well, what was really hard in previous, the supervised, like when I was doing the supervised learning is what Andy was talking about. I think it was really hard to, people can talk about negative topics in different, in, positive and negative ways, but the negative topic itself, it sort of can be really different. Like you're sort of identifying the negativity of the topic, if that makes sense, instead of the way that somebody's talking about it. I think sometimes bag of word models, I think, are better suited for identifying changes in topic matter than perhaps in like the manner in which people are talking about those things.
Thanks. Has anyone of the others something to add about how specifics of the NPF make it challenging for their methods to apply? I think, Laura, you also wrote a lot about this in your book chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that we have these very distinct definitions for villains and heroes, which really align when you're doing something like assigning affect and giving them some sort of ranking on a scale. So when you're putting into numbers, that can be really conducive to making that happen. We can rank people, but then I had some difficulty, but also some real fascination about looking at victims, because they can have affect that goes either way, and they have low power typically, but they can have affect that go either way, because not everybody admires victims, or not. There's not there are stories politically that are about victims being part of the problem or being the bad guys themselves. So anyway, that's what was somewhat made it difficult with the automated coding. So that's why I had to back out affect and power dimensions in my dissertation. I didn't do this in the book chapter, but in my dissertation, I backed out power and affect using existing dictionaries so that I could see where they lie on that scale. So it's sort of an extra step that you had to take. You couldn't directly apply that sentiment analysis as you could with those very well-defined good, bad, which is kind of what sentiment analysis is, right? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Liz, you also had your hand up.
Well, I think that setting and plot are tougher to do. So they aren't as well defined. I mean, I've just been working with solutions and characters and problem definition, which kind of ekes into frame, which is like NPF adjacent. But also the random thought I put for smart people on this call, I think that LLMs can be used for visual, for images too. And so if you're doing media work, for example, to determine even if it's a policy narrative in and of itself, I mean, there's a reason that there's an image that is attached with text. And so what does that image, how does that contribute to the power of the narrative? I think that I haven't done it yet, but I think it'd be great if someone did.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I was in a Python course and they were talking about a lot about computer vision, and I also had the same thought. Andy, do you have anything to add?
Sure. I just wanted to say, I think it's the second time I've been on a Zoom panel with Kylie, and she explained something so well, I didn't really need to say anything about it. And it reminded me of something else, which is I forgot to say that in the first article that I talked about, we hand coded 500, originally most influential. We needed 10% of the original users to make that fold happen well, that I think Kylie explained very well. So we actually hand coded 5,000 in the end, which was 10% of the unique users. Also, Kylie talked about how two positives could end up being negative. There's actually an old statistician joke about this. I'm sure it kills at the Marriott on the Thursdays on the conferences there. But the idea is that we know that two negatives can be positive in the English language, but there aren't a lot of cases where two positives can be a negative. The professor says out loud, and then the student from the back of the room says, yeah, right. So like there are cases all the time in language where it can have those mistakes, and I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. I think we'll go on to the next question, starting with Liz. Those auto-coding techniques, I mean, they allow us to code huge amounts of data, but bit proactive. Is the NPF ready for this? Are there any theoretical developments that have to be made? And are there things in the theory that we might miss if we only rely on these methods? A lot of questions.
Yeah, well, so we're talking about a method that can be, that's for textual data. And so NPF is really just one theory that says, you know, that narratives matter, and that, you know, what is the power of narratives in the policy process. And so I just think this is a tool. And we need to be conscious of our tools to understand. I do think it's going to speed things up in terms of discoveries. Honestly, you guys, like when I go and read, like if you go into other literatures like marketing or into some of the psych literature, people are way ahead of us, way ahead of us. And so this is actually going to speed up, I think, discoveries. And maybe there likely is a feedback loop to theory there. But for example, time. The NPF doesn't deal with time, and this is a huge part of it's missing. We need to understand how time works and the power of time in a narrative on people's experience with this narrative. So we're imperfect, but you know, whether this tool will help us discover some of those holes in the theory and improve the theory, probably, as any method and scientific discovery does. We will always be improving, but it's bigger than the NPF. This tool, this method is bigger than the NPF, and I think we just have to have an eye toward the ethics of the use of the tool too, and the scientific rigor.
Does anyone want to add?
Well, just about time. In my dissertation, I did look at evolution of blame over time and also social constructions over time. So I think there is the potential, because we can quantify this and do over the long, we can do a lot more volume. It does allow for the potential to do more meaningful studies on time, because there really isn't a lot out there. I had another thought, but it is gone if I think of it all.
Your comment already kind of, or both of your comments kind of went into the direction of my wrap-up question, which is, what will the future of autocoding bring to the NPF? Maybe everyone just wants to say 1 or 2 sentences what they think will be the developments in the next 2, 3 to 5 years. Kylie, do you want to start?
I have to think for a second. The easy answer is perhaps larger data sets to be analyzed, which I'm sorry, I can't remember. Was it Laura maybe who you asked what did auto coding add, like what value add was it? And somebody said that like it lets you look at fine grain variations, right? Then you can look at not just like on average, proportions, but proportions within smaller and smaller subgroups. So maybe auto coding is not just, increasing by increasing the size of the data, you can also, get smaller and smaller granularity to be able to understand variations within that data.
Andy, do you want to go next?
Sure. I mean, yes, large and maybe it sharpens some of our definitions. I think Liz poked earlier and Kylie picked up the thread that thinking about prompt architecture when you're working with the LLMs, which I was doing a lot with my students in the last year, trying to like instead of being afraid of it and saying no generative AI in your papers, just instead like working with them on documenting how they use it to think through things. I think that will change the way we define things, maybe the way we train coders, as Kylie said. Like, I think it's super interesting. I would be remiss if I didn't mention I'm a little worried in the next few years, not just on the energy that it requires, but on the justice component to which schools and which universities and which departments have access to different models, let alone which students that have it earlier in their stages. I teach undergrads, right? And I'm not saying, Colgate is, is a place where everybody's on a Pell Grant, but we have diversity here too. And I'm seeing it in my classroom who has what models and what they're able to do with it and how early they were able to work with them. And I think this is the defining thing. It's like having a home computer in your house in 1987 or whatever, right? And that worries me too. And I'll also just say, so I don't forget, thank you for inviting me. This was great. And I'm on sabbatical this semester, so if anybody wants, any junior scholars want to talk about anything, or if I can be of use, shoot me an email now before it gets too warm. I can't fish and ski the whole time. Or if Liz, you want to talk Wollongong.
Thanks. um, Liz, do you want to add some last words?
I was thinking in the opposite direction, Andy, but I'm so glad you said what you said, that we have to be mindful of disparities of access. I was thinking that this method and tool would open up the NPF to more PhD students, to more in more countries, to more varied data, to different kinds of regimes, governing regimes. Because I think human coding is exhausting. It's a labor of love, and I think this is going to change our landscape of who's in the sandbox.
Thanks for your thoughts. So I'll give the last words to Laura.
Yeah, I did remember my thought about finding it. Liz was saying that we're learning faster and faster, and I think that's one of the benefits of this automated coding, is because we tend to look at like our results and the main thing that comes out, but you can take, for instance, a probability distribution of sentiment, and you can look at those cases that align with the outliers and try to use those and try to understand what are those telling me? Why do I have such wide ends here with this character? Because so I think it really allows for looks at things in different ways. So but as far as the future and the direction, I'm interested in that time component and in incorporating more of the social construction and the blame elements, because they do have pretty set categorization already. I forgot my wording here today, but anyway, so those are things that I think it would be lovely if they're integrated more into the research in the future.
Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. We're already running out of time, and I also want to give some time to Alexandra in the end, but we'll still have a few minutes for you to ask your questions. Is there anything that is unclear? Any thoughts that popped up to you? I think Kathy, you had posted a comment in the chat.
Yeah, Eula, I think this is not a new thought, right? But I love your question to Liz about sort of how, if we're going in a certain direction, like what is ChatGPT really good at, and how will that make us look at that and think that those things are important because ChatGPT is good at it, right? And I just was sort of reminding us that we do that already in the NPF, not to try and say that certain things can't be modeled quantitatively, but we tend to focus on those things that are more amenable to that, right? Where and we know that as a community that we want to look at and understand other things that aren't as easy for us to use some of the quantitative methodologies that have already been in place to do. But I love that question that you asked, Eula. I thought you did. I loved all the questions that you asked today. I thought that was such a
Thank you.
fascinating panel on a topic that I run the opposite direction from usually. So I really appreciate it because it helped invite me into something that I was like, ah. So I appreciate that. I see Shell's hand, so I'll turn it over.
Thanks. I just had a quick question. I really liked how Liz described that the use of an LLM model is a tool, and we need to be conscious of that tool. And so I was just wondering if there was any considerations about these LLM models having any type of inherent bias in their programming, and how does that affect like the outputs they have with the data, or are there any considerations of that bias throughout their training of the model or the analysis process or anything like that?
Yeah, I think Kylie can probably help with this too, but there's definitely bias because what does ChatGPT have behind it? It's, it is this internet out there, right? And they are biased. So you need to definitely be careful. I don't know, Kylie, if you have can be more precise in, in that. It's an excellent comment.
No, yeah, that's absolutely right. I think it does, if we're talking about auto-coding things into categories, I think that's probably an argument for not just checking whether performance or reliability of, again, on average, but perhaps within subgroups that matter. I don't know, what those subgroups are probably depend on what you're actually studying and where you might see that bias come up. But I think that there's an argument for checking to make sure that that coding doesn't differ within those aspects that you fear bias may be impacting.
Yeah, I'll just mention too, it's a great question, Shell. Like, you all probably all remember when there were stories about how they were using AI to profile people with video cameras, and there was racial bias in the data. There have been articles about the bias in the language of these models because it's the language of the internet, and there's also recency bias. And then Liz also hinted at something earlier about you can see it really quickly if you train it on like data. You're going to see it learn from you faster than you might be hoping it did. And so I think there's a lot of reason to be concerned about that for sure.
I also have an anecdote about that. I was teaching a seminar with master's students, and I gave them some text snippets from political debates about climate policy in Switzerland, and asked them to code it with ChatGPT. And ChatGPT actually coded, I think, the people fighting for climate change as a hero, even though it was like clearly a villain. So it had this bias towards climate action. Really interesting. Is there one last question? Yeah.
I haven't put this totally in clear thought, but I do think there's some this thinking about evidence and facts, and the fact that ChatGPT is very frequently wrong. I do have some concerns there. How do we manage that? Of course, my solution when I'm working is to keep looking at our data and keep managing it and making sure that we're looking at it. But I do have some concerns about the training data for it being factually incorrect, and no one's, even people in big spaces right now are saying there's no objective facts. And so I'm concerned about that when it comes to using these models as a research method. Like that is problematic for me. Yeah.
Liz just typed in the chat that prompt engineering might be something to
Yeah, I
tackle
mean,
that.
I think that, so if you have if you have, US coders coding Central American narratives, they're not going to get it. And it's the same thing with ChatGPT. So it has to do with the prompt engineering, and it has to do with, I think, understanding what it's learning, what it has learned from, what it is pulling from. But I think we could potentially have the same issue with humans and context, and not understanding context or tone, because you're from a totally different culture. So all of that is absolutely accurate, but I don't think it's only generative AI that is the issue. So I think we always need to be kind of aware of our biases.
And I don't want to be like too othering about this, but that's especially true if the model's trained on the Chinese language, which is radically different from the English language, especially in its allusions to history and literature that are mostly unfamiliar to an English speaking audience in the United States. Really different, which like links it to geopolitics in a super interesting way.
Thanks. I think I will now give the word to Alexandra, because she wants to present part of her project just in a few minutes and ask some questions about coding habits, because she's trying to put together a training data set for automated NPF coding, and she really faced some challenges there that she would like to have some input about. Should I share your slides?
I think they're not even necessary at this point. I think
Okay,
after this great
perfect.
discussion, yeah, I was ready to explain to all of you what, automated coding looks like, but we are clearly in a group of experts, so there's absolutely no need. Yes, so yeah, my name is Alexandra Brunkrona, and I'm part of the Social Data Science Center at the University of Helsinki. But I think it makes sense as a disclaimer to start by saying I'm not a social scientist, I'm not a political scientist. My background is in engineering, in digital humanities. I did a bit of future studies as well. I did this fantastic course in the University of Edinburgh called Narrative Futures, which is where I found my way into narratives. And then I approached Daria Gritsenko, my supervisor, saying, hey, I want to look at narratives in energy policy because I have all this background knowledge and I want to do this way. And she said, well, there's the narrative policy framework, and you should probably look into that first. And so, yeah, that's why I'm here. I have this background, and I'm trying to apply all these NLP methods on policy data, and I would really like to do that from the perspective of the narrative policy framework. And I think I should mention that we started by doing this sort of literature review over what's been done before, also narrative policy framework, of course, but we know that there isn't much yet being done there, but also in different fields, looking at narratives from different perspectives. So we started with seeing what's out there. What are the sort of state-of-the-art methods looking at narratives from the perspective of, for example, characters, but also from plot and all of that. And now I came to the sort of point where I'd like to do a demonstration of, okay, I have all these methods. I'd like to demonstrate how this would work on the narrative policy framework. And alas, realized that there is no sort of available data that I could train my model on, or something where I could sort of benchmark what I'm doing. And since, yeah, I've been looking for that. I've been talking to some people, including Claudio, who I saw was here but left already. And I was multiple times asked to maybe talk here about this and see if there are other people out there. And I actually heard already during this session that there are other people out there doing stuff like this, and you already have data sets available. And I think it would be really cool. And I have this sort of dream now that I would create this sort of openly available data set of different annotated types of data according to the narrative policy framework, and perhaps starting with narrative format, but we'll see. So I think I'll stop there. I don't really have a lot more than questions. So, do you have any such data that you would be willing to share with me? Or do you know of any such, code book that I could use to, for example, prompt an LLM? But yeah, please, the floor is open to give me some hints, and if you have questions for me, that would be great. And of course, I'll put my email in the chat, so you can reach out to me also outside.
You could so we haven't published our stuff yet, but we are going to make it open. And my guess is we would just let you into the GitHub that we have, Alexandra, but just you need to email me and I'll talk to the team, but we're just so behind in getting this out. So we can help.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I'll email you directly then.
Yeah, we'd be happy to share our sort of Twitter coded as well. I think it's an open question to you whether you want the auto coded or just the human coded.
I think the human coded is what I need, actually. Yeah.
Oh, we have lots of human coded data and I need help on the other end. So yeah.
Yay! This meeting is doing what it's supposed to do, helping bring people interested in things together. I also think it would be great to have like a pre-MPSA, probably not this year, but another year, or a what's the European ECPR, right? That was really focused on this type of work. It'd be great to have people in a room that cared about this, sharing methods and
maybe
ideas about how to do it. Yeah,
right?
that's a great idea. Yeah. And this is what the dream of the research coordination network would be to have more more ability to do this. But thank you, Alexandra, for sharing this sort of here's where I am with this, and gives us lots of ideas for how to get more closely connected.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for organizing, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Thank you for preparing for the panel and participating and sharing your thoughts. I think for me personally, it was really helpful. I got a lot of new ideas what I want or could do. Yeah, any other last words? Something you want to share in the last minutes? Kathy, Hani, something you want to add?
I'll just say quickly, Kathy's notion that we need to be careful of, looking where the light is, like using these devices to find more things about drilling deeper into specific sections of the NPF as opposed to applying them more broadly. That's like that. That's a, to talk like the NPF, that's a meso level problem, right? Like we all need to worry about it in addition to our collective efforts, because we're all going to cite each other and all that too. So.
Great. Thank you all for being here. I think we'll stop here. I wish you all a wonderful day or evening, depending on where you are. And thanks for joining. And you'll hear from us soon, hopefully, about the date for the next workshop.
Thank you all. This is
Bye.
lovely.
Thank
you so much. Goodbye.